Barry Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College, and welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues affecting our communal well-being through a nonprofit lens. We're a proud partner of ACC TV, but given COVID-19, we continue to operate virtually for our 5th season. This episode is part of our series on the Asian Pacific Islander experience in Austin, which includes people from at least 25 countries who represent 40 different ethnic groups. This diverse community makes up at least 8% of the Austin population and is growing rapidly. Asian Americans are often overlooked. Partly this can be attributed to the model minority myth, the assumption that all Asians are wealthy and highly educated and therefore not needing social services. But income and education within the Asian community varies. Immigrants coming for professional opportunities and refugees starting from scratch are often lumped together. Also, language can be a barrier for people needing social services. My guest today is Hailey Easley, Executive Director of the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative, which exists to partner with local Asian community to improve the health and well-being of Asian and Asian Americans in Central Texas. They do this through education, advocacy, and support, through language-specific education and healthcare navigation services. On her LinkedIn page, Hailey describes herself, and we're going to ask her about this, as an advocate and nonprofit leader dedicated to achieving health equity in Austin. She's been recognized for her work with AACHI as a Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health leader, and has recently been invited to serve on the City Community Reimagine Task Force to develop recommendations, reimagine and transform public safety for the city of Austin. I've had the pleasure of working with Hailey and AACHI for several years as a consultant for Austin Public Health. I'm very, very impressed by her ability to navigate change, stay so positive, and be so persistent in achieving the organization's mission. Welcome, Hailey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So, before we go any further, why don't you tell us a little bit about Hailey Easley? Easley.
Sure. So I am, like you said, I'm the executive director of the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative. I'm from Texas, and I moved to Austin after college. So it was 10 years ago. And I joined the AACHI, the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative, in 2017 as the program manager. Mm-hmm. And I was a program manager for about 2 years, and then for the last year and a half, I've been the executive director. And I was a program manager of a program called the CHN program, which helps limited English proficiency immigrant Asian communities in Austin navigate the different healthcare and basic needs resources in Austin.
So what led you to your current work?
So I think that definitely inspired by my family. My mom was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, and my dad immigrated from Korea. Both of these, I think I grew up seeing them experience a lot of difficulties in basic life functioning, right? So getting jobs or seeing the doctor, getting to participate in my school, PTA and stuff like that. And so when I went to college and I learned about systemic inequalities and the history that has created these kinds of circumstances for folks, I decided I wanted to dedicate my life to that. So yeah, that's why I'm doing what I'm currently doing.
So talk a little bit about the evolution of AACHI, what it is, what it does, and how it's evolved over time. I believe it was very involved with the creation of the Asian American Cultural Center.
Exactly, yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that and share some of that with our viewers.
Okay, so for a long time in the city of Austin, I think that Asian American needs were pretty much unrecognized, partly because of, like you said, the model minority myth, where people believe there's this idea that all Asians are rich and don't need any help. and they have their own organizations, they just don't need public attention. And so I think in order to counter that, there's this group called the Network of Asian American Organizations. They created a nonprofit called the Asian American Resource Nonprofit to develop a center where Asian Americans could meet and have a space to celebrate, to gather, to help each other out. And so this nonprofit, AARC nonprofit, did some advocacy and fundraising for about, I think, from 2006 to 2013. And in 2013, they were finally able to create this space called the Asian American Resource Center. And it's an amazing space. They ended up making and having an agreement with the city of Austin. So it is a Parks and Recreation Department facility that offers all types of really amazing programming, educational and cultural programming. And so after that facility was established, I think the board of the AARC nonprofit didn't quite know what its role was, because that facility was now a city facility. And when they started looking around and talking to the community, they realized that health access was actually a huge issue, and that although there were multiple cultural sort of arts and culture organizations in town around Asian culture, there's nothing to help support health access for Asian Americans. And so they decided that they wanted to go this route. So they started the CHN program. It was a pilot in the summer of 2016. It did excellently and had tons of clients. So we've been growing ever since. And in 2018 is when we changed our mission to our kind of growing interest and priority on health access. So it went from being the AARC nonprofit to the Austin Asian Community Health Initiative.
So talk a little bit about the role of advocacy in AACHI.
Sure. So we have, in our CHN program, we have CHWs. CHWs are, their role is to be the bridge between the community and the resources available in the community. So
those are community health workers, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So community health workers, part of their role is to advocate. So essentially, we've been doing advocacy since the CHN program started, as soon as we hired folks to fulfill those roles. So we do advocacy on an individual level. So if we see that clients need language access, and a clinic, like a public clinic, which they are federally required to provide language access services, if they're not able to get language access, or if they're having trouble, our navigators help to speak out on behalf of the client to make sure that they get those services. And on the larger level, we regularly talk to Texas Department of State Health Services and Austin Public Health to give feedback and speak out on behalf of our community to make sure that the services they provide are culturally and linguistically appropriate.
That's a great segue to my next question. So talk a bit about the diversity of the populations you serve and what challenges that provides for the agency.
Okay, yeah. So we serve the Burmese, Korean, Vietnamese, Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, Nepali, and Hindi speaking communities. They all have very different histories and very different needs. So for example, the Burmese and Nepali communities are refugee communities. So they don't really have issues with documentation because of their refugee status in the United States. However, they have very, very limited resources. They came here with very little. So they have financial barriers. They also have subsequently transportation barriers because they may not have cars. They also have language barriers because they don't speak English. But then they also have literacy barriers in their own language. So a lot of them may not be able to write or read in their own language. So the ages that range, the folks that we we serve in that community range from, 20 to however old. And whereas the Korean community, a lot of the clients, so the Korean community, a lot of these folks came here voluntarily. However, they have often have, they are documented or have visas, but there are several folks who don't have documentation. And the folks that are part of our program, they're all low income, but they also are primarily seniors who don't have family support. And they don't speak English as well. They also have transportation issues, and as seniors, they have disability issues. Our Vietnamese community is kind of similar to the Korean community. They have the documentation status kind of varies, and however, they are not necessarily primarily seniors. They range from across ages. And then, our Nepali navigator speaks Hindi, so she also helps Hindi folks, or folks who speak Hindi. And then finally, we just started with our Mandarin Chinese community. They're actually one of the largest, most established communities in Austin. But they've been around in Texas. The Chinese community has been around in Texas for a very long time. However, just from the sheer number of folks, even though they might have a lot of established organizations, there's a lot of people falling through the cracks who aren't necessarily getting help. So, so we are here to help serve these folks too.
Is it your sense that the general public understands the diversity of the community or their documented, undocumented statuses?
I think it's really challenging because of the way that media and our culture portrays Asian folks. We often see either kind of, when we refer to Asians, I think culturally we think of folks who are light-skinned, who look East Asian, who are wealthy and educated, and that obviously is the case for many people, but it's absolutely not true for others. Asians look like South Asians, Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders, East Asians. They have different color skin. They speak multiple different languages. So I don't think that, across our culture, we really understand how varied these experiences can be.
So, and you've mentioned some of them already, but if you were to identify the two biggest challenges faced by your clientele, what are those?
I think language access is one of them. Even though it's federally mandated for publicly funded organizations to provide language access, many of these organizations are doing the bare minimum. So, for example, Community Care is a wonderful public clinic. It's a federally qualified healthcare center, so that means they accept Medicaid, Medicare. They provide amazing services. They're a really great institution. And they will provide interpretation at your doctor's visit. However, in order to make an appointment at Community Care, you need to be able to speak English or Spanish, because they do not provide interpretation in their phone tree. And on top of that, when you have the billing department send the client the bill, which usually doesn't cost anything, but that terrifies the client because the client can't speak English and the billing department only speaks English. And so even if the client wanted to call and ask, the billing department is not able to provide interpretation. So there are just really large pieces of the process that go unsupported. A second issue, I think, is just I think another huge barrier for our communities, I would say it's transportation. A lot of these folks do not have access to transportation, whether it's because they have a disability, because they can't afford a car, or they don't know how to drive. And the public transportation system that we have doesn't provide interpretation or translation. So even I think if you imagine trying to go on a bus, even if someone shows you this is the number that you get on, this is the number that you get off, sure, certainly you can use numbers. However, if you miss that number, you're not going to have any idea how to get back to where you were supposed to be. So that makes it really challenging and scary for people to try to make it to their doctor's visits or checkups or vaccinations. So I would say those are the biggest two immediate barriers.
I think it's important just to highlight is those things that many of us just take for granted in terms of communication and accessibility become a challenge. It's like traveling in a foreign country without preparing. You have no idea what's going on around you, and even benign behavior can be misinterpreted as negative behavior.
Mhm.
So the whole coronavirus COVID pandemic has triggered an increase in racial aggression throughout our society. And reports are that it's particularly affecting Asian communities because of the way our former president characterized it as the China virus. Um, how does that affect your clients? Is it affecting your clients? What's your perception?
I think of course, it varies, right? So just as I said earlier, the population is so diverse. So I think when you consider Asians that are maybe um, like our clients who are lighter skinned, right? They don't necessarily express as much fear, but that's just our clients, right? So I've read tons of news reports that um, doctors, like just regular people, like people like you or me, that um, we might immediately feel safe because we have, bachelor's degrees or associate's degrees, and we speak English and we're from here. They're feeling a lot of fear. So I think it really depends on the person and the environment that you're in. But I know for sure that our Burmese community specifically has felt a lot of fear because of the reports of like an attack on a Burmese family at a Sam's Club in, I believe, El Paso.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and so I think that because that specifically Burmese family, like ethnicity, was represented in an attack, our Burmese communities and clients are feeling a lot more on high alert than the rest of our communities. However, we just started serving the Mandarin Chinese uh, speaking folks, so I don't have quite of a sense on how they're feeling, but I know that there a lot of people are just feeling nervous.
So you're obviously a young Asian American. Uh, talk a bit about how your experience is different or the same as somebody who's immigrated from Asia.
Sure. So as someone who grew up here and was born here, I think that I just don't have the experience as a lot of our clients. So one thing, I don't have an accent, so people aren't going to question my authority or my intellect because I don't say things just in just the right way. So if I go to a doctor's office and I say I'm feeling pain here, I'm not going to get questioned about whether I actually feel pain. Whereas our clients constantly, and I don't think this just happens because of the accent. I think it happens to African American folks, Latino folks, but our clients are getting questioned because they don't sound like the doctor may anticipate or want. Another issue that I don't have to face is that in terms of class, which also separates me from people even who were born here, I consider myself middle class. I don't have to deal with a lot of the financial barriers that a lot of people have to do. I had the opportunity to get an education, so a lot of these folks, um, because they weren't able to get an education or because they don't present in a certain way, they are passed off for different jobs. They aren't permitted to apply for, even like get their foot in the door to apply for opportunities that might help them financially. Um, let's see, in terms of culture, it's hard to really understand the systems here if you weren't born here. So for example, in Korea, the healthcare is federally funded. And so you can go into a doctor's office, no appointment, go in, not to pay anything, expect to be in and out in 30 minutes and be done. So
Well,
when you come here from Korea and you've experienced your whole life, the system here is where you have to have an intake, you have to call like weeks in advance, you have to pay, there's a copay, there's a deductible. It's kind of madness for them. They almost feel like they don't even want to bother with it because it's so much and so much they don't understand. So yeah, there's just so many differences between, having the experience of participating in the American system, being able to speak the language that everyone else speaks. But the one thing that we do have in common is that we experience discrimination and prejudice just because of the way that we look. So people assume that I'm from China, and they tell me that my English is really good, and that that they asked me if I'm a communist. I've been asked if I was a communist before. So they're
Are you? No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
I hope not. I don't think I am. But so yeah, it's just, I think that that's one thing that we share, is that because of the way that we look, we experience a certain treatment from folks. Not everyone, of course, but
Did you face some special challenges growing up as somebody who came from mixed heritage?
um, not especially, because I'm sure I had identity issues with my mom was more my family was more culturally Mexican, just because my mom had recently immigrated. And so I didn't really understand the feeling of being culturally Mexican and looking very Asian. But in school, that's the thing about race, is that race isn't about who you are, it's about how you look. And so I was made fun of at school for being Asian, mocked, pulling your eyes back, or saying little, those rhymes that they have. So yeah, I was mocked and alienated quite a bit in school just because of the way I looked. But as far as having a mixed background, I think that it actually just opened up my eyes to sort of the arbitrariness of these distinctions.
Mhm. So, when you've completed your tenure at AACHI, okay, and we're not putting an end date on there, okay, what do you want to look back upon as what you've achieved, either what's already happened or something that's in your mind as to what still needs to happen with regard to AACHI?
Well, I want to make sure that the health systems in Austin, especially hospital systems, the city health systems, and the county's health systems like Central Health, are consistently and aptly considering the needs of these Asian American groups who need support and deserve support. These are most of these people, the vast majority, I would say 95% of these people are tax-paying residents who, just like you and I, deserve to be treated, deserve health care, and they shouldn't be discriminated against because of their language or their lack of knowledge or inexperience. They deserve help. So I would like to leave Austin, or leave this position, knowing that these systems are doing that.
So when you speak about health equity, I think you just defined it, but just to be sure, what do you mean by health equity?
I think health equity is where everybody gets the opportunity to live a healthy life. So obviously not everyone's going to make the best decisions. Maybe you don't get your vaccinations, but everyone should have the opportunity and the chance to get that. So that means that if you can drive and you can speak English, you have a chance, right? But also if you can't drive and you can't speak English, you also have a chance. It doesn't really matter whether the differences outside of health, you still get the opportunity to have that health in your life.
Excellent definition. So who have been your mentors? Who have been your role models? Who do you look to for guidance?
I would say Vince Cabalas has been a huge influence on me. Vince Cabalas was the assistant director of Austin Public Health,
He was
And
the first person I interviewed in this series. I know
oh,
Vince
really?
for
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Vince has been a huge, huge, huge influence.
wonderful man.
He's incredibly dedicated to serving the entire Asian American community. He, after he retired from the department, he served as the head of the Asian American Quality of Life Commission. And even after he is no longer the chair, he's still serving on the commission. I even asked him, I was like, could you please be on my board? And he was like, no, I want to be able to serve all the different Asian American folks. So I think that, he really is just so dedicated and without ego, um, interested in making sure that we have equity um, on all realms.
Anybody else?
Hmm. I would
All right,
say
go ahead.
um, I would say the person who inspired me initially was Jill Ramirez. She is the head of the Latino Healthcare Forum, and she trained me to be a CHW when I first started. And she really taught me how to speak out, and she taught my staff how to speak out and the importance of um, just showing up to meetings, showing up and realizing that as long as you show up and as long as you say something, and you do it persistently, things will change, things will happen. And so I think that that spirit was incredibly influential on me and on my staff.
So that kind of leads me to my next question is, so if you were sharing with somebody who wanted to become a Hailey, okay, besides changing their name, uh, what what would you tell them? What your hard earned, because I know you work real hard and sometimes things are difficult to achieve. Um, talk a little bit about the lessons you've learned in your relatively short, compared to me at least, professional career that you would want to share with somebody um, entering into this arena.
Sure. I
Besides,
think
don't do it. Okay.
I think that especially when I was in college, I had this idea that prestige is the only way that you could get anything done. So, you know, you had to go to Harvard or you had to, know people or have, just have some sort of power or influence. And that certainly is true in many ways that can help. But you don't have to be this all-powerful, prestigious person to be able to participate in change and create change. What it takes is some luck, I think. I think some skills, right? You need to be able to read and write well and to be able to have good relationships with people, and to be able to manage your emotional, social emotional self. Um, but as long as if you're managing those parts and you are persistent, you can create a lot of change. You don't have to be someone special or important to make change. And as long as you are persistent, um, it'll take you places. You just have to be persistent. And I think that um, I had no idea that I would ever become like the head of an organization, and so what I was focused on was how do I get this done and convincing and both asking and for and asking about how to get it done. So I asked everyone that I could possibly find, okay, what is going on? How is this working? And then once I figured that out, I went everywhere. I went to all the meetings and I spoke up and I was persistent. I just kept talking and talking and talking, which is not normal for me. I'm an introvert. So, and eventually people heard. It won't feel like that at first. It kind of feels like nobody's listening, but I think that if you're just a buzzy fly in their ear, they'll eventually listen. So, and I didn't feel like anybody, like I was just some random person who came in after going to school and started this part-time program position. So, and it's created change. And I think that I wish that I had been a little easier on myself whenever I was younger to not expect so much of myself and just to realize that it's not about prestige or being any certain thing.
That's very profound. We're all too hard on ourselves in this arena. Hailey, I really want to thank you for this conversation. It's a pleasure chatting with you, and it's a pleasure working with you. I think your persistence is evident, and I think that your contribution to both your organization, the Asian community, and the overall Austin community is far greater than you might be able to imagine at the current time. So your voice is being heard. Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This is really fun.
My pleasure. So thank you all for watching and participating in civil society. And thank you as always to Kate Tolliver, our managing producer, for her support. You can read more about Hailey and Austin Asian Community Health Initiative and the issues we discussed and view previous and future episodes of Civil Society at nonprofitaustin.org/civil-society. And you can view our prior programs on the Hispanic experience, Latino experience in Austin, and also on the Black experience in Austin. And following our focus now on the Asian experience, we'll be focusing on the Indigenous American and Native American experience. So thank you all. Have a great day. And you all take care. Okay, it's a wrap.
Great.
You were superb.
Thank you.
We'll cut out the technology problems.
Okay.
Okay, but I thought you certainly were genuine, and that's really important in a context like this. So, and go ahead, Kate. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, great job.
Thank you.
And we'll get you a copy, and do whatever you want with it. I mean, if you like it, it might be something you want to put on the website.